to public input, and the first member up today is Roger Hawkins. Roger, is Roger here? Hi, Roger. So Roger, as Roger makes his way up to the front desk, he will be talking about Auckland Transport's proposal with respect to Ponsonby Road and Pompalia Terrace with pedestrian improvements. Welcome to the meeting, Roger. You press the talk. There's a talk button that should go on red. You've got 5 minutes for your presentation, Roger, and then some questions from the councillors. So welcome. Thank you. Your slide should be brought up to aid your presentation.
I'd like to, thank you very much, Councillor. I'd like to start by showing this rather obvious slide. The yellow line at the bottom, orange line, is the Consumer Price Index, and the blue line is the rate that rates have increased since 1994 through to 2021. There has to be a sense of reality start to kick in soon that people simply cannot keep paying. Thank you. Keep paying rates increases at the rate that they are. If central government increased tax each and every year by greater than the rate of inflation, there'd be rioting in the streets. And council doesn't seem to understand that you are getting away from people's ability to pay rates increases. My own rates, being irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, 43% last year. I put in an objection, still haven't had that dealt with, and the last I worked out on the numbers that were provided to me is those rating objections won't be handled until January 2024, which is simply not good enough. It's my argument that, in fact, the rate of inflation is the only criteria that would allow you to increase rates by, if this was a business and it was being run as a business. I think it's important to understand that, in my view, unnecessary spending by Auckland Transport is paying a significant part in the expenses and costs that Aucklanders are now having to pay. And a lot of the work that's being done is simply unnecessary. In my view, it's make work projects being done by council, and that needs to stop sooner rather than later. Ratepayers are simply not a bottomless pit of money. In any normal business, I mean, I've worked in both corporate and small business, and if you don't have money, you don't spend it. You certainly don't borrow to do things that are simply not necessary or not needed. In my view, the Meola Road improvements, in inverted commas, and Great North Road are simply not necessary. Sure, you can put in cycleways and other improvements in inverted commas, but you shouldn't be doing that at the expense of the free movement of vehicles. Trucks, cars, ambulances, fire engines, and everything else also uses those roads. There's $1 billion so far has been put into cycleways, and to date, not nearly enough people have been moved from cars to cycles to justify any more spending, and certainly couldn't justify the spending that's been done to date. The raised pedestrian crossings, traffic lights at every pedestrian crossing, which is simply not necessary because cars must stop at a pedestrian crossing anyway, so lights aren't necessary for that. Overheight judder bars, deliberately compressing roads, 30 km/h restrictions, and most importantly, why do we need 24-hour bus lanes? Sure, in the peak periods have bus lanes, but Quay Street, Fanshawe Street, all of those areas where there are 24-hour bus lanes are deliberately compressing vehicular traffic into congested roads. Ruining the ability for people in Auckland to get around is not actually making Auckland a better place for its participants. By making cycleways available for cycles and scooters, and I ride a scooter myself, electric scooter, doesn't mean necessarily having to ruin it for cars. The two can work together, but a classic example for me is the bottom of College Road, where on the bus that I came in on this morning, the cycleway runs between the bus and the bus stop. Now, what genius came up with that idea? That is just simply a madness. My argument is that we should be putting the $77 million back into the bank, and that $77 million is what's going to cost for Meola Road and Great North Road to be improved, in inverted commas, when the cycleway down Williamson Avenue is the obvious solution to that. And I think it's important that councillors understand that in order to spend $77 million of ratepayers' money, ratepayers, not residents, ratepayers, have to earn $100 million and pay tax and then pay their rates, and that money should be spent significantly more astutely than it is currently at the moment. Most importantly, the AT's chairperson a while ago admitted to Parliament that they were deliberately trying to force people onto buses by making vehicular transport difficult. I'm going to skip to the research now. This is research that Councillor Darby has quoted live on TV, and what was said was that over 50% of Aucklanders want to use a bike to get to work. Absolutely incorrect. If you look at the statistics carefully, and market research is my background, the question was, would you ride a bike once a week or more if you owned a bike? Now, only 9% of people actually own a bike. So if 50% of those that own a bike were thinking of riding one day a week, that does not constitute the 30% of people that is claimed are currently using or want to use cycles. The statistic number that is being used there is, over the period of 4 years, has dropped to 132 people who were questioned in order to get the assumption that 1 in 3 Aucklanders ride a bike.
Sorry, Roger, could you start to wind up now?
Yep, I've got one slide that I want to finish with. Ponsonby Pompalia Terrace. This was a 2017 project that was held up because of COVID. The world has changed since then. We simply cannot justify the expense that's being used here to raise pedestrian crossings that are already working perfectly, to deliberately, and this is the part that is beyond comprehension to me, to deliberately compress 4 lanes down to 2. And the 2 lanes that flow into Pompalia Terrace and around the back of Blake Street, 1 lane goes back into town through College Hill and the other lane goes onto the Harbour Bridge. And Auckland Transport, in their infinite wisdom, are trying to force that all into 1 lane, which will force a choke point of significance into that one part of town that simply is not needed, and there is no way that that job can justify the $1.5 million projected to cost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger, for your presentation. Do we have any questions? We have a question, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Roger. Okay. Thank you for your presentation. A number of times you mentioned improvements, so you don't believe there are improvements. What is it that you're worried about, or what is it that you don't think are improvements to the roading, put aside the cycling, the roading corridor?
Well, none of them are actually improvements. What they're doing is deliberately compressing roads so that it's difficult for a vehicle to get around. Now, an improvement would be to ensure that cyclists and scooters are safer, and you can do that by putting them onto a footpath with a white line. Most importantly, the improvements that are proposed for Great North Road and Meola Road are going to create massive choke points. And if you look at Great North Road in particular, the traffic that's going to be compressed into 1 lane is now going to be, if you're trying to turn right into one of the side roads and there's a car coming out of those side roads, you're not going to be able to do that. And there's only 1 lane out of town other than the bus lane. So if you're trying to turn right and you can't turn right, the traffic behind you is going to back up all the way to Queen Street. Now, that's not an improvement. The road is functioning perfectly well at the moment. I've lived here 43 years. I know that area particularly well. There is no justification for $43 million to destroy the road as opposed to improve it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Sayers, quick question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Roger, my question is just around the first graph you put up, and linking rates to CPI.
Yep.
So obviously, when a city like Auckland perhaps is undergoing growth or has catch up to do with its infrastructure, and there's some capital costs that need to occur there, have you got other models or ways that you might fund that necessary infrastructure? I understand what you said about, living within your means, but are you talking about user pay systems or just any other ideas you had around funding for growth?
Well, funding's a function of what needs to happen, and the simple fact is water, we needed to fix the sewage going into the harbour, but a lot of the funding that is being done and a lot of the money that is being wasted, and I mean wasted, through Auckland Transport, is on work that simply doesn't need to happen. And if it doesn't need to happen, doesn't need funding, and you can reduce your rates increases to a point where people can actually sustain those. I think one of the critical things is, in a small business, if you haven't got the money, you don't spend it, and you don't borrow it either. You only do what's essential. So instead of doing the nice-to-haves, I think this committee has to start thinking about what we absolutely need. We don't need Ponsonby Road ruined. We don't need Great North Road. We don't need Meola Road done. We need a tunnel under the harbour bridge. Those are the things that should be funded by the essentials out of ratepayers' money.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much, Roger, for your presentation. We'll save the thank yous once we've gone right through public input. And Roger's presentation is on Nexus for any of the members that are online.
Do you have a question?
So the next presenter today is Mari J, who's talking to us about a case for congestion charges on Auckland motorways. Welcome, Mari. You have 5 minutes with your group, and then a couple of questions. The bell generally goes about 4:30 to give people a signal, the hint to wind up. It's not always listened to, but we try to keep to the 5 minutes. Okay, welcome, Mari, and over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, councillors. I do just want to make a little mention of my regret to hear that Mayor is leaving today, because in trying to get an appointment here, what a lovely, warm and helpful voice at the other end of the phone. So thank you, Mayor. I have a doctorate from the University of Waikato in environmental planning, and I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, Auckland. And my reason for being a member of Extinction Rebellion is a passionate knowledge, understanding that we are at a critical point in climate. The climate situation really is drastic. Extinction Rebellion, they're rebelling against all the things like car transport, fuel, fossil fuels and so forth, driving us all to extinction. And this morning, I just want to remind councillors of the question of congestion, which you have discussed to death many times. You've had the question of congestion charges 6 or 7 times. My own, as I say, I'm an environmental planner, so I'm not actually a transport planner, but I see in 2016 the Auckland Transport Alignment Project. 2017 first came up the congestion question. Could road pricing improve? I need to be... Sorry, I haven't got this. What do I do with this thing? Can someone help me?
Yeah, perhaps. Can you do it? Yeah. So Maya will do it for you, Mari, just manually.
Help, help.
He's the last person you'd ask for help.
Okay.
So
Yes, so 2017, you had a report, the congestion question, could road pricing improve Auckland's traffic? 2020, the congestion question came up with a technical report. I might say that both that exercise, congestion came up as, yes, you definitely can use congestion pricing, and yes, it definitely is effective. There have been cities overseas, London, Stockholm, many others, where they've used congestion pricing for a long time, and it makes the kind of impact that we have here when school's not out. In other words, it reduces traffic about 10 to 15%, and it does make roading much easier. So next came that inquiry into congestion pricing in the House of Representatives. Very, very important, very fine report. I can't recommend enough how it's nice and short, worthwhile reading. It's major recommendations, legislation to allow congestion, implement a congestion pricing scheme in Auckland, undertake broad public engagement to help people understand, and it made the point that that is critical. If you want congestion pricing to work, you absolutely need to make sure people have it on board, know why it's there, and the second point is they need to know that all the revenue from congestion pricing is going into not just roading improvements or car improvements, but bus improvements and cycling improvements. They need to know that the congestion money is going to make it easier for them to get to work by other means. In May 2022, just a year ago, the Radio New Zealand said, government expected to give green light for congestion charges. What happened? Where is it? Why is it a year away and we still haven't heard any more? Instead, what I found in the budget proposal for this year, increase fares by 6.5%, bus fares and ferry. Reduce bus trips, 588 per week. Impacts on train services due to Kiwi Rail, staged back track closures. Well, can you imagine any better way to encourage more cars on the road than make it harder and more expensive to go by bus? Honestly, what a twitty kind of approach to the whole question. Now, one of the big issues of congestion charging that keeps on coming up.
Could you just wind up now, Murray, please? Is
equity. It doesn't have to be a problem. You can make it so that, for example, cleaners and security guards, etc., come in usually overnight. Well, congestion charges can be time-based. Why? And if it's limited to the city centre, it gets rid of a lot of the congestion without affecting other parts of the city. So I suppose I'd like to wrap up by asking, why doesn't the budget reflect all your expensive, time-consuming expert reports? Where are the equity provisions for South Auckland if you are genuinely concerned about making transport easy for everyone? And where is the leadership for Auckland transport? At the moment, it looks like you are going towards another 2% increase in congestion by next year.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Murray. We have a couple of quick questions from Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Darby.
Oh, thank you for your spirited submission to us this morning. As somebody who has advocated the need for congestion charging for some decades now, you touched on, and you ran out of time, why people are opposed to it. Because what I find fascinating is it's not like one of those public transport roading debates where people are really polarised. There's objections across the spectrum. And yet, for all the reasons you've articulated beautifully this morning, there is a very sound case for it. What other observations have you made? You touched on some of the equity issues, but are there any other reasons as a planner that you've identified that have been blockages for advancing this, other than obviously we can't do it without legislation? But, you know, I would really like your commentary.
Yes. The reading I've done about congestion charges, for example, in London, was exactly, there was all sorts of opposition, but once it started and people realised that it does make a difference, currently, okay, so now congestion charging has been going 10 years, and it's businesses, industry, and ordinary people are all in support of congestion charges. So it is a thing where council needs to take leadership and explain the situation first.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Darby?
Thanks, Maury. Thanks to the group. Is it Extinction Rebellion's understanding that the bill will be presented to the House in the current session? And do you have knowledge that the bill is totally supported by both Labour, Opposition, National, ACT, Greens? I think maybe Te Pāti Māori might have some concerns, equity concerns, as you have. Is that your understanding of the situation currently? And if that is legislated in this term before the House rises pre-election, are you saying to us today that enabling legislation, I think it's going to be enabling legislation as opposed to a directive of the major cities which are asking for it, is your group's view that we should be proceeding with some greater urgency to begin developing a plan for the implementation of congestion charging, and even more immediately, that is, in our annual budget and our long-term budget, to address transport poverty and equity at the very top of the agenda?
Thank you. I didn't know about the bill, but that's very helpful information. I think congestion charging is something that can't be rushed in. It needs to bring people as much as possible on board and give people the opportunity to find alternatives and suggest alternatives to reducing traffic on the road. So, yes, long term, it needs to be part of the long-term plan, and you need to have a series of, what would you call them, steps towards getting to that point. So it's not something that you just switch on the traffic lights at the moment and start it up.
Thank you very much, Murray. Just before you go, I'll ask our Director, Barry Potter, just to clarify where the council's going with congestion charging this year.
Thank you, Chair. And it's the intention on our work plan to bring this to this committee in the next 2 or 3 months. So it's on our work plan to bring congestion charging here for a discussion and consideration by councillors.
Excellent. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much, Murray. It's good to see that's put a smile on your face there. That's nice to see. Our final presentation and public input today, I'd like to invite to the table Peter Burke, and Peter will introduce the crew with him. And the topic for presentation today is bike ferries across the harbour, which I imagine there'll be some interest amongst a number of parties that are here today. Okay, welcome, Peter. I'll leave you to do the introductions and when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to introduce George Burke and Stuart Thomas. George will be our spokesman in this presentation.
Morena. Yeah, my name's George. It's an honour to be here in front of everyone. Representing Hauraki Express. We were established, we're a family-owned business, established in 2012. We run fishing charters, water taxis, light freight, and we've most recently launched a fuel delivery vessel. So we service the outer Gulf. We hold all our marine operating certificates, including our dock pest-free certificates also. Just a little bit of background on our idea here. It's no secret that the Ministry of Transport has been seeking a means to get cyclists across the Waitemata Harbour. Research suggesting that 1,800 cyclists would cross the harbour on a dedicated service per day. We have developed a concept for transporting these cyclists around and across the Waitemata Harbour. Our overall ferry concept is to use existing infrastructure operating between boat ramps, wharves and jetties where possible, with the goal of connecting cycle lanes and routes around the city, creating higher utilisations of these cycleways. In doing so, we forecast the reduction of 6 million kilometres per year, eliminating emissions from those 6 million kilometres per year. Not to mention, we will be facilitating a healthy lifestyle for 1,800 Aucklanders per day. These bike ferries themselves, they'll be purpose-built. We plan to have 6 of these in operation. They'll be roughly 12 metres long, electrically powered with outboards, with a capacity for 24 cyclists. They'll be built in New Zealand in recyclable aluminium. As you can see, they've got the loading ramp at the bow, and also we've got loading ramps on the side for use at wharves and jetties. So just have a look at this map here. We've got the overlay, the green overlays of all the cycleways. Then you'll see yellow dots and red dots. Those yellow dots are our harbour crossings. The goal is to get people across the harbour as quickly and efficiently as possible. And those red dots are those more long-haul trips. Also mentioning we plan to service Waiheke as well. Those main pickup points around the Auckland will be Bayswater, Birkenhead, Stanley Bay and West Haven. Further out, Hobsonville and Half Moon Bay. We'll come back to this map at the end for any questions. I'll hand it back over to Pete. He'll talk about the numbers.
Right, thanks, George. The basis for our analysis, the cost-benefit analysis, are these key inputs. Waka Kotahi has determined that 1,800 passengers will use a service, or cyclists will cross the harbour per day by 2028. We've assumed we plan to have 6 vessels, each with 24 cyclist capacity. We forecast we'll be starting off at 50% occupancy and rising to 70% by 2028 to meet that 1,800 demand. The fares we have used are $5.80 for the short crossings, and that's the current hop fare, which is discounted. $10 for long haul to further out destinations, and $20 to Waiheke. The costs. This is over 4 years, and we've put in bold the key figures. So in year one, 2 boats, 384 passengers per day, $1.8 million investment by Hauraki Express, and that grows through the 4 years, and in the 4th year, 6 boats, 1,800 passengers, and a total of $5 million investment by Hauraki Express. The cost benefits, that's cost per benefit, costs versus the benefits. Now, the costs are made up of our operating expenses less the fares we would receive. The fares being based on the current discounted fares, mainly $5.80 per crossing. The public benefits are a combination of savings. First one is the cost to provide road travel in Auckland, and that includes the roads themselves, the infrastructure, the emissions, the parking, etc. The cost of congestion in Auckland, which is really a unique cost for Auckland alone, and the benefits of a healthy and fit Aucklanders, and especially taking pressure off the health system. We've got data from the Ministry of Transport to do these calculations. And you'll see that with 2 boats in year one, it's actually quite a shortfall of operating costs and fares. It rises up to 3 years, and then it drops away. And beyond 4 years, it actually the public cost, which really is the subsidy arising from the discounted fares, starts to get into positive territory. The public benefits from what I've described before are actually very, very significant. And you see the total over 4 years, $2.65 million of cost or shortfall in income, and public benefits $26.8 million. That's 10 to 1 benefit to cost.
So yes, as a brief summary, Hauraki Express Bike Ferry Plan provides significant public benefits at little public cost. Capital and operating costs are covered by us, Hauraki Express. The public costs are minuscule compared to government's initiatives to establish a dedicated harbour crossing for cyclists. The benefits to public purse far exceed public costs. As Pete said, it's 10 to 1. So we want your full support in this, and we want in this initiative, and we would like to engage with council to make this all happen.
Right, thank you very much for that presentation, a particularly exciting prospect, and well supported by fellow presenters, I see. So we've got a few questions here. Councillor Walker, Councillor Turner and Councillor Hills. Over to you, Councillor Walker.
So I've got 2 questions. The first question is to yourself and Barry, and you can think about that in the meantime, and that's how we can advance this. Okay, so just give some thought to that. The question that I've got for your team is, you can deliver this, I'm assuming. Do you have the crew? That's one question. Is there any infrastructure requirement on council's part? And I think you may have already addressed this. How quickly could you put this in place, given that I think there's a very quick turnaround? You can build the boats yourself. And the other question that you may not have the answer to that, I understand the economics and the benefit cost, but the return on investment in terms of carbon reductions must be absolutely outstanding. So I don't know whether you've given support to that. So a few quick questions, Mr. Chair.
Staff-wise, we've been around for 12 years, so we've got a pretty amazing staff base. We've got skippers, contract skippers that work for us, and they want to work for us full time. So this would be a great opportunity to bring more people in full-time work. What was the other touchings?
How fast could you get going?
How fast? Maybe Stu could take that one.
Yeah, so we've got a really good relationship with Extreme Boats and their commercial and bigger boat, legacy boats down in Whakatane. And so they're keen to put their hand up as an option to build the boats. We'd be looking to get them underway next year.
Next year?
Yeah.
What, start of the year?
They would be able to get one of those out the door sort of mid next year, I believe. Yeah, they tend to build another shed and get them more staff when they get busy, so they've got a really good team down there.
Got that. So the other question was, no infrastructure requirements on the part of council?
Correct, so it's all around using the existing boat ramps and wharves that are there where necessary.
And the last question around carbon?
Yeah, that's the carbon emissions are included in the benefits. They've been monetised in the calculations. So taking 1,800 people off the road, or it would become motorists or travellers on buses, users of the road. That has been that's included in that total.
Got it. And
Yeah, okay, we'll answer a question at the end. Councillor Turner?
Thank you. Sounds like a good idea. I just might want to... it won't work. Oh, it does now. Sounds like a good idea. Just a couple of questions. Propulsion. You talked about electricity and then you talked about you've got outboards on the back. Is the primary propulsion outboards or is the primary propulsion electrical?
So these will be electric outboards, which is obviously new technology, and that side of technology is always progressing. So it's it's exciting to see what they're coming out with.
So the other question was, are all your passengers going to have to be accompanied by a bike, or are you going to accommodate people who haven't got bikes? And if so, how are you going to manage that?
Yes, well, we've got obviously e-scooters and other means of transport like that are more than welcome. The priority would be cyclists. If there was someone at the end of the, once we'd loaded everyone on, and if you were about to leave and someone said, "Oh, I missed the ferry," chances are you get them on board. But because we're going to the boat ramps and designated areas, the cyclists will be there, and I think the passengers will go to those ferry wharfs.
And one last question, which just come to mind. So if your propulsion is electric outboards, you've got a bunch of internal operations there that will have standby motors, petrol, diesel-powered generators.
Yeah, you'll have diesel-powered generators just to kick in if needed, but these being short trips, you'll have enough battery to work those day trips back and forth.
I'm talking about the hydraulics, etc. on board.
So hydraulics will be run by another motor.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And finally, Councillor Hills.
Thank you. This is really exciting. Would be good to just get it done. I guess two questions. One, have you talked to the Minister, because the Minister has talked to Chris Darby and I around funding this sort of thing post the no access for bikes over the harbour from Wakakutahi funding?
Yeah.
We've approached the Minister twice in his capacity as Minister for Auckland and Minister for Transport, and we haven't had a response.
Okay. The other thing, and I probably would say, just knowing the condition of the coastal assets in the harbour, that there probably would be some infrastructure, so maybe factor that in to that. My other question would be, is this predicated on Auckland Transport funding good cycling connections to these areas? Because, despite what some people think, we're spending less than 1% of our transport budget on cycling and not even completing that. So do your numbers assume that we're actually going to spend some money on safer cycling so people can actually get to these wharves?
No, they don't. Do you want to go to that map? We have the priority destinations or pickup points are on the North Shore, Birkenhead, Bayswater, Stanley Bay, and on the south side, Westhaven and Okahu Bay, although Okahu Bay is more exposed to weather. All of those have existing ramps and jetties, but the ramps are quite adequate for our operation. We don't envisage any work necessary or on the land to be done, and we don't see that there's a need for any resource consents at this stage, although experts might tell us differently, but I don't think there are any consents other than the maritime consents that we normally get anyway.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hills, and thank you, Peter and team, for an excellent presentation. I'm sure if the Mayor was here, that would fit in very well with his concept of doing more with less and trialling things and getting on and giving things a shot. In respect of the question you posed, Councillor Walker, I think you will find the response to that in our recommendations for all the public input. In the first instance, to receive the input from Hauraki Express, and to request that the presentation be referred to Auckland Transport and Waka Kotahi for consideration and report back to this committee. Waka Kotahi and AT representatives are at this meeting, so they've heard the presentation, but we will formally send it through to them for a response. If we could have a mover and a seconder, please, for this one. Moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconder by Councillor Sayers. All those in favour? We'll just move this first. You had about 5 questions. We've done.
I've got a question.
No, we're moving it. We're set. Against? And do we have a motion for the other 2 presenters that we had today? Okay, moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Fletcher to thank our other presenters. All those in favour? Against? Okay, carried. So thank you very much to everyone who presented in public input today, and Peter and team will get back to you and keep you updated with respect of what comes back from Auckland Transport and Waka Kotahi. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Don't lean on these front panels, guys. It's not a good idea. Yeah.